Before we begin this editorial, I'd just like to give a shout out to Dr. Beeching's director, Roy Gould, who just so happened to tune into the previous edition of this show. Roy, I hope you're well, I hope you're keeping safe, thank you for all your hard work, and thank you very much for sparing the time and the patience to hear what I had to say. I apologise for anything I said touching any nerves, but in the interest of remaining unbiased and fair-minded about everything, I hope you can appreciate why I came to the conclusions I came to, and that any disagreements that we do have, we can just agree to disagree with them. So, yeah, thanks for your hard work, and I hope you stay safe. On with the show. Oh, Dr. Beeching, how could you end? It all looked oh so promising, but timing was no friend. It all felt gone to waste, and the ending too bizarre. Oh, Dr. Beeching, what a short-lived show you are. Off the back of analysing Oh, Dr. Beeching and how it ended without a chance to round things off, I thought it would be a fun idea to imagine how it could have ended had it been given another series. Now this editorial is going to end up very fanficky, as no doubt there are things that some people won't agree would work, nor would agree they're what David Croft comedies are all about. And it's fair to say this will be nothing like the ending that David Croft and Richard Spendlove may or may not have had in mind. Indeed, there's bound to be some cliches you could see coming a mile away amongst this pitch. But I think we should all be open to having our own ideas, and sharing our thoughts with others, and agreeing to disagree with those that we don't like, even if nobody knows how to do that on the internet. At least it gives us a chance to explore themes and ideas which weren't necessarily touched on in the show, but may or may not have been touched on in other David Croft comedies. So here goes. This is how I feel Oh, Dr. Beeching could have ended if David Croft and Richard Spendlove were given one last series. We pick up the action at the start of 1964, a few months after the show left off. The line has seen a fluctuating return in traffic, partly due to the closure of 3 stations mentioned in the previous series, but also highlighting the flaws of the Beeching report only being written when most of the more rural lines were in their proverbial quiet period. Mr. Parkin is still station master and remains determined to keep his station the best on the line. But as ever, the staff have their own standards and their own ways of doing things. They're still managing to take bets, organise haircuts, sell produce, and all the usual backhanded deals that they get up to. But Parkin is becoming ever more suspicious as time goes by. The first couple of episodes reveal that local traffic through the station is under increasing threat and not helped by the staff's misfortune. In the 1950s, British Railways offered door-to-door delivery with its goods, and in a bid to compete with local delivery firms, Mr. Parkin has the brainwave of delivering parcels from the station to passengers' doorsteps using his van. He hands this task over to Jack for 3 reasons. 1. Jack is still the only person qualified to drive the van. 2. Parkin says he still can't leave the station. And 3. You guessed it, having Jack away from the station means that Parkin can spend more time to pop into the buffet and see May. Unfortunately, the van breaks down, fails to start, gets stuck in the mud, and by the time the staff resolve all the problems with the van, goods traffic through the station is withdrawn altogether as there's no money in transporting it. Passenger traffic is a little more promising, but it comes with its own set of troubles. The local bus company puts up some stiff competition as it offers a more flexible service that can take passengers to their doorstep, but it's cramped, uncomfortable, and more prone to breakdown than the tried and tested steam trains. So it's horses for courses as to who chooses what for their commute. That is, until a late winter snowstorm hits the area. Now this is nowhere near as bad as the Big Freeze of 1963, regarded as the worst winter in modern British history, but it is bad enough to render the bus route that follows the contours of the railway useless in bad weather. So it's a little victory for the train. The bus still runs, but in bad weather there's no competition. Don't say it, I know, it's a cliche, but it's nowhere near as obvious as the train and bus racing each other. Let's be honest, while it would have been a nice homage to the Titfield Thunderbolt, the idea has been done more than once, so any imitation of that idea would only come across as tired and begging for parody, especially as it would be obvious that the steam train would win, because it always does. Throughout the show, recurring characters get a chance to develop further. In the last series, Percy the Guard hinted at Ethel that he was interested in the two of them getting together. Ethel thought he was getting the wrong idea, so the proposal was dropped. Here though, he keeps trying his luck with Gloria, Amy, and even May, but when all 3 of them stitch him up, he comes to realise that being a player his whole life just doesn't make him a decent man. He feels incomplete and weak without someone to turn to. He therefore turns over a new leaf and tries to get by on his own. Ethel also tries her best to get by on her own, but Wilfred is still proving a handful and she's still mourning the loss of her late husband after he went missing at the end of the war. Then, one episode, her late husband miraculously turns up out of the blue. Initially, she's thrilled. The love of her life is now back in her life. Unfortunately though, it turns out he's now with someone else. He reasons that once he went missing, Ethel wasn't there for him when he came back. To make matters worse, he mistakenly assumes that Ethel is with Percy because he sees the two of them chatting together. But while Ethel explains that she was left to raise Wilfred on her own, the two realise that it's been 18 years since they last saw each other and they've both moved on in their own ways. Ethel is obviously very heartbroken by this, but Percy, feeling mournful and lost himself, is happy to at least be there if she needs someone to talk to. Not necessarily someone to love, but talk to. Their relationship builds from there, and by the end of the series, Percy has proven that he can tie himself down to one woman, even though he does have to know who's boss. Then there's the matter of Gloria. It's revealed in the last series that Parkin couldn't have been her father because his blood group doesn't match. See, the Skinners are all blood group O and Parkin is AB. AB and O parents can have children who are either A or B but not O, so naturally May and Parkin can only assume that Gloria is Jack's daughter. That is, until May's other connections are questioned even further. Remember in previous series she's acquainted enough with the likes of Mr. Orkindale and the Mayor? Well, it's hinted that May might have been seeing other men besides Jack and Parkin during the war. It's not confirmed, but with Mr. Orkindale popping in from time to time and the two of them seemingly getting along very well, the staff and Mr. Parkin continue to have their suspicions. While overhearing such mutterings and ending up being caught in the middle over who her father is, Gloria becomes more tired of her seniors than before and vows that once college is over, she's off to university where she can get away from her family and form her own destiny. Unfortunately, given what's about to happen in the middle of the series, she may change her tune and morally decide to stick with her folks. It may seem a bit pointless to focus an episode specifically around her, as most of her story arc was explored in previous series, but it allows her character to be fleshed out a little more. By the middle of the series, Mr. Parkin has indeed kept the station up to a high standard of cleanliness. The staff have managed to put on a good show, and the station does look the part. But Beeching's only interested in saving money, and when Percy the guard smuggles a copy of Beeching's report along the line, the staff gather round it to find that the line and all the stations on it are listed for closure anyway. Their efforts have been for nothing. However, in the following episode, it seems there may be a turn of good luck. Like other routes listed in the Beeching cuts, the railway is a duplicate of another line serving the same starting point and destination. Beeching simply looked at both lines and recommended the one that loses more money should be the one that's closed. But in the aftermath of the heavy snow that the characters dealt with earlier in the series, swollen rivers bring down two of the bridges on that line and render it uneconomic to repair. BR therefore recommends that all traffic should be diverted along the line originally listed for closure, meaning the line through Hatley is in fact staying open for good. In the penultimate episode, there's further good news when it's discovered in the railway's original Act of Parliament that the railway has to remain open with a minimum service of 4 trains a day, and it turns out the stations which closed the previous year are amongst the list of stations that have to be served as part of this act. The only downside is, by a complicated twist of fate, Hatley isn't on the list. See, the line was opened before Hatley, so the Act of Parliament predates the station's opening. Cruelly, Hatley is still listed as a loss maker and therefore is still listed for closure. With it, all but one of the railway cottages are up for sale. With the inevitable increase in traffic, the signal box is likely to be busier, much to Harry's misery. On the plus side, he's guaranteed to keep his job and his home. But on the minus side, Vera, Ethel, Wilfred, Jack, May and Gloria are now facing eviction if they can't raise enough money to buy their cottages from British Railways. But how do they intend to raise the money?
A final flutter, it's my only chance.
Yep, the entire staff use their collective background in bookmaking to suss out which gamble would be the safest one and so bet their life savings on it. It's a bit lazy and predictable, I know, and it does beg the question if gambling is moral or not, but it allows the staff to use their experience in bookmaking to their advantage. And sometimes in life, things are a gamble and you've just got to take chances when extreme circumstances come up. Naturally, Parkin finds out about this and he disapproves of such a gamble, so he refuses to chip in. But it turns out his hard work to keep the station presentable may not have been in vain. Parkin is offered a new job elsewhere with better pay and subsequently encourages May to come with him. May's tempted as she might end up homeless if she stays with Jack and the gamble doesn't pay off, but ultimately she stands her ground. Jack was there for her when she needed someone, they have a daughter together, and they built a long and happy life over 19 years. So Parkin goes away and isn't seen for the rest of the episode. The staff win a fortune on their collective bet, which means they can put their deposit down on the remaining railway cottages, right? Wrong. No sooner do Jack and May attempt to purchase their cottage, they're informed that the cottages have already been sold. But who to? We find out in the opening of the last episode that the cottages have been sold to a motoring firm who intend to turn them into a garage of all things. For a railway family, there couldn't be a bigger grain of salt to rub into the wound. Yet for some reason, the motoring firm wasn't interested in buying up the station building or the station master's house that goes with it. May, flabbergasted by what's going on, once again tries to use her high connections to her advantage, and so catches the next train to Clumberfield to try and speak to Mr. Orkindale. But just as she leaves the station building to catch the train, Mr. Parkin comes in trying to find May. But surprise surprise, the two miss each other. He's in a rush to pack his bags and get to his new job, so he leaves a brown envelope on the kitchen table. Pay attention to this plot point, as it might become important later on. May comes back later on in the episode, having failed to speak to Mr. Orkindale. All alone, she collapses on the kitchen table, only to find the brown envelope. She opens it, reads what's inside, and suddenly rushes outdoors when she hears Mr. Parkin's voice. Outside, Parkin is saying his goodbyes to the station staff, but is perturbed by May's absence. He says he'll get the next train, only to be reminded that it's the last train of the day, and he won't get to his new position in time if he stays any longer. As he boards and the train pulls away, May rushes onto the platform with the envelope in her hand, only to find him staring back until the train disappears. Jack questions why she's so upset, and so she shows him the shock that you may or may not have seen coming. The envelope contains the deeds to the station building, station master's house, buffet, offices, platform, the lot. And they've been signed, leaving the station building to May and Jack by Parkin. Yep, knowing May loves Jack, Parkin bought the station building and signed the deeds in her name so that she and Jack can keep living in the station master's house. He does it for her because deep down, he just wants her to be happy, and he realizes that she'll only be at her happiest if she stays with Jack. Thankfully, this frees up all the staff's gambling winnings for renovation work. The station already has a station master's house, and the rest of the building has running water and electricity. All it needs is a refit to become a new set of shared accommodation. But this begs the question, just how much did Parkin pay for the station building? Following the station's closure, we cut to 10 years later in 1974. The buffet has been converted to a cafe and tea room for the new garage where the railway cottages used to stand. The cafe is run by May and Jack, who are now living in the station master's house while Gloria has moved out, gaining a degree, finding a job, a car, and a boyfriend. She still sees Amy on occasion, but with both having full-time careers, they don't get together as often as they used to. Wilfred, now working in the new garage, still has rock star aspirations and has become a much better guitarist. He's moved off the Beatles, grown his hair out, and is now digging the rough, denim-clad likes of Status Quo, Mott the Hoople, and Uriah Heep. This inane racket only serves to annoy the garage's owner, played by Stuart McGugan, who previously played Gunnar McIntosh in Innate Half Hot Mum. Wilfred still lives with Ethel, who's now found a job as an administrator in a nearby town and settled down with Percy, who still works for British Rail, but very much towing the line of his now wife. The trio are living in what used to be the waiting room, booking office, and station master's office, but Wilfred's racket only annoys Harry even more. Yep, the old signalman's still here, and he's not just working the signal box, he's now living with his full-time housekeeper, Vera, who of course took a shine to Harry in previous series. It may seem easy to allow Harry to keep his job, but given how much he hates being a signalman, it's only funny to keep him suffering, especially as he continues to advance in years and is now rushed off his feet more than he was before. The passing loop through the old station is still in situ, so Hatley is used for block section and train crossing purposes. Now granted, we never saw trains passing at Hatley before, but now the route is busier, more trains pass here than in previous years. Plus it gives us an excuse to find out what happened to Arnold and Ralph. Ralph is now driving the train, a DMU of some description, solo as a fully qualified driver. Arnold's now happily retired, having chosen not to continue when his beloved steam engines were all withdrawn, but he's glad that Ralph no longer needs his guidance. On this occasion though, the train mysteriously pulls up at the station while Jack, May and a few others are outside having tea, when a familiar looking gentleman steps onto the platform. It's a very casually dressed Mr. Orkindale, who reveals that he's now retired, But there's another familiar looking gentleman stepping off the train in a black suit and a bowler hat. It's none other than District Inspector Cecil Parkin. Yup, the youngest station master in the district has worked his way up the ladder and is now filling Mr. Orkindale's shoes. They've stopped by to catch up and wish their old colleagues well, but the question arises, just how much did Parkin pay for the building? Well, seeing as the garage owner wasn't interested in using the land for his own needs, Parkin reveals he persuaded British Rail that maintaining such an old building would come with a certain degree of liability, and demolishing it would cost more money than the land was worth. Therefore, Parkin was able to buy it in 1964 for just £1, which in 1974 was worth about 52 pence, the purchasing power of more than 2 pints of beer. Now, I admit this sounds completely implausible, but there have been freak sales of railway infrastructure for low prices in reality. The Bluebell Railway in Sussex managed to purchase both Imberhorn Viaduct and Sharpthorne Tunnel from British Rail for £1 each in the decimalisation era, due to the liability that both structures carried. Furthermore, the idea of converting stations into houses emulates the sale and conversion of Nunnington Station in Yorkshire, closed in 1954 and bought up by a retired couple who would later turn part of it into a local tea room. Having long settled any differences they've had, the party gossip over a nice cup of tea, while the camera slowly tracks out across the whole station building and the credits roll for one final time. Now, it would have been easy for Parkin to become the obvious villain, having gone against so many of the staff's wishes and practices in the past, but the thing about David Croft endings was that they usually allowed opposing characters to reconcile. At the end of It Ain't Half Hot Mum, the concert party were pushed beyond their limit by Sergeant Major Williams right up until they were disbanded. They say throughout their final hours together that they're going to beat up the Sergeant Major once they're officially out of the army. But once they're all out, the concert party look across to find that the Sergeant Major is a broken man. Everything he knew as a professional soldier has been taken away from him, thus the concert party have too much heart to beat him up and just leave him to his own devices. They bump into each other later on to find that the Sergeant Major's got nowhere to go, so Gunner Parkins, his alleged son, ends up taking him in, or taking him back, whichever interpretation you choose to believe. It's a similar story with a lower low. The occupying Nazis became so well loved by audiences in their own way that the writers don't have the heart to charge them for war crimes, as most of them were doing what they were doing just for the sake of following orders. Therefore, once France is liberated, we cut to years later when the characters have moved on and made up with our French protagonists. So why shouldn't a similar thing be written for Parkin? Yes, he's pushed the staff to work hard, and he's often tried time and again to get Jack kicked off the station, but when it comes down to it, he's worked the staff hard because he doesn't want them to lose their jobs. As the man responsible for the station in uncertain times, he's felt the weight of Beeching's axe on his shoulders more than most. And even though he wanted May to himself, he does at least want her to be happy. Part of love is down to mutual happiness and understanding, and sometimes one just has to take the bullet for the sake of someone else's well-being. Parkin tried to keep the railway family together through occupation but failed because of Beeching, so the only way to keep them together was to give them the literal key to a new way of life. In short, his way of reconciling with the other characters may come across as too unbelievable for some, nor the most satisfying for others, but it does give everybody a more satisfying ending to the show than the BBC prematurely gave the show when it was axed. At least this way, the characters can find a new way of life more peacefully, as only the best David Croft character comedies do. So there we are. That's just one way of how Oh Dr. Beeching could have ended. How do you feel it should have ended? Are there any theories you have about the show that could have continued? Or do you simply have plenty of time on your hands? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Or you know the score by now, hopefully. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.